You can holler at the end.
Yes, please. I want it to be even louder than the really exciting social media one.
Now that you're done.
There's no better audio either, texting, or recording the statement you wrote in there.
It just started doing it on its own? Wow.
Apparently, it was transcribing it.
Mine was doing that earlier, and it was like, and it was said I was saying like something purple, elephant, something. I was like, no, what? Okay, so it's 2:30. We can get started. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Rachael Taft. I do work for Granicus now, but this is not going to be some bougie vendor sales pitch. This is actually about my experience when I was working at Manatee County, which I just left in April. So I submitted this before then. So accessibility has definitely been something we've heard a lot about this week. This is not going to be a technical presentation about, the do's and don'ts, technical stuff. I think you've probably gotten a lot of that already this week. But one thing I have noticed recurring through a lot of these conversations has been accessibility is really important, but it's become a part of this bigger conversation too about user experience, customer experience. A lot of these efforts really accomplish both of those goals. And for federal government, they've been talking about accessibility for a while, but now they're really putting this emphasis as well on the user experience. And government should be accessible for everyone, and most of us are doing stuff now on our phones, which a lot of the same things that we're telling people not to do, stop putting PDFs up, that's helpful for you on your phone too. So there's a lot of things, as you are trying to tackle this challenge, they can kind of tie back to that larger message if you are having trouble getting people to follow along with you on that journey. So my situation in particular, I joined Manatee County in 2017 to lead this website redesign project, and right before we launched our new website, we got sued for accessibility, and it was actually more focused on the PDFs, which were not going to go away even with our new website, even though I was trying to cut them back. So I got called into the attorney's office, and they said, so we should just pull down the website and just not have a website anymore, which we did not do, but there were actually several cities around us that did because they were afraid, because someone was pretty much going around Florida and just suing everyone. So I was asked to work with our attorney's office to come up with a settlement that was reasonable for us, including like a timeline and everything, and to try to figure out how the heck do we create a plan and become accessible, become compliant. I was on the communications team, which was me, a videographer, and my boss, who was the PIO. So I was really the only person that was doing anything related to the website. So I was the person that was responsible for basically figuring everything out on my own. So thankfully I had the buy-in, obviously, from leadership because we were sued. But over the course of this process, I did have 3 different leaders, and it was a slightly different conversation with each one in terms of why this is important. Obviously, we've got legal issues, we've got compliance. Inclusivity, though, that really played well with one of my other leaders, so talking about inclusivity. So you kind of need to figure out what your message is, but I would highly recommend, if you don't already, say, we're going to put together a policy so that we can all be on the same page. That gives you a lot of credibility across the organization as to what standards you need to meet and why. So to get that conversation started, I've been with the county for a year. I don't know half of what's going on and what processes are going to be affected by the decisions we make. So I put together a digital accessibility work group, which included people from most of the different departments. My biggest concern, more than the website, was really our agendas. Like, they're hundreds of pages long, full of PDFs. And I don't know the content of the types of things that are going on there. So I wanted to make sure that those people were really represented in these conversations and helping us make decisions on what, how we were going to attack this issue. So I'm going to go through basically each of these. Each of these topics was one of our meetings. So we were meeting every couple weeks for a couple hours and discussing one topic and trying to come together with decisions on how we were going to address that and incorporate it into a policy and procedures that would, go across the whole county. So it's very important to start with the scope of your project. I mean, for us, when we came to our settlement, we wanted to focus and prioritize on the things moving forward, but we were also being held accountable for everything that was already existing on our website. So we had to kind of establish what, I think that's a really important conversation for you to have, is are you just going to say this is what you're going to be accountable for doing moving forward, or are we going to try to fix everything that's already out there? Because that's a big thing to get your hands around. WCAG is obviously the standards that most of us are looking to. I've talked to some people here who have said that there's going to be more changes on that, and hopefully maybe a little bit clearer in terms of tiers is what I've heard. So that might help you prioritize a little more of what things you want to focus on first. And then probably one of the biggest things too is what content and what platforms are you actually going to address. The big ones are always, the website, okay, but what about the other digital tools that are incorporated onto your website? GIS is really big was big in our county. There's a lot of different tools in there, and some of them are not that accessible. Are you going to deal with that, or how are you going to deal with that? Public meetings and agendas was the other one that really scared me. Even email communications, a lot of people wanted to say, well, we won't put the PDF on the website, but then people can email us if they want it, and I'll email it to them. I'm like, well, you're still digitally transmitting that document, and it's still probably not accessible. So are you going to deal with that, or are you going to pick your battles and maybe save that for later? Social media is another one that is probably a completely different audience than some of these other things that you're thinking about. So when you're having these conversations, if you kind of establish at the front, what are we going to focus our efforts on first? As they say, I think it's you eat a hippopotamus one bite at a time. So you kind of figure out how you're going to attack this problem and takes creative steps to figure that out. And then your timeline as well. Are you going to take a phased approach? Maybe in 6 months your goal is to have a policy put together, and then maybe 6 more months you're hoping that everyone will be implementing that. Maybe it's another 6 months that you start tackling the things that are already on your website. We were held to a timeline based on our settlement, so we had a certain date that we had to start making sure that we were following, everything new was compliant. We actually built into our settlement certain things, like exceptions that we knew were going to be a little more difficult for us, or timelines where if something had to go up right away, we had a week to maybe make it compliant and replace the inaccessible one. Obviously those aren't, ideal scenarios, but at least if you have something that you're holding people to and something that's reasonable, it helps you start to, feel like you can actually manage the issue. So roles and responsibilities. What was really important was for us to have kind of champions in each department. And I'll talk a bit more about training, but getting those people to not only understand what their responsibilities might be, but also be invested in why you're doing it, and care enough to spread that message. So we identified, obviously there are certain types of people that just make sense. Website editors are your gatekeepers, right, to your website. They're the ones that are usually, we have basically a couple website editors in every department, and they're the ones who are uploading the PDFs. People are sending them to the website editor and saying, put this up. So you want those people to be empowered in some way, whether it's to just evaluate what they're giving and send it back, or give an alternative suggestion if it's not something that can go up, or if you're able to train them to be able to actually remediate documents, that might be a part of their responsibility as well. Marketing and communication staff are usually right in the fire of all that, so that's someone else you want to have on your side. Agenda management staff was really important for me. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about how we divvied up the training, but basically we kind of identified the content creators and then the gatekeepers, and they had different types of training so that they could try to create accessible documents or think about other ways to create information online. And then the gatekeepers were able to kind of use Acrobat to evaluate if things are accessible, remediate them if they can, things like that. And then admin professionals are also really important. Usually they have their kind of heartbeat on what's going on in departments, but they're also the ones who might have a boss who wants them to print something out so they can sign it and scan it back in and put it on the website, and so they need to be able to kind of navigate those kinds of situations. So once you've got those people, and hopefully identified the cheerleaders among them too who will help spread your message, you have to kind of figure out who's actually going to be responsible for what. You know, we tried to have our website editors be the kinds who could fix documents and who could be educated enough to try to figure out different ways to put information on the website. But sometimes you just had to really be clear about what is your responsibility, and if they're not educated in that way, are they just gonna send a document back to someone and say, sorry, you can't do this, too bad? You know, you wanna try to build in what those expectations are for those roles. And then the biggest piece is having a central person, which might be you, who is the final decision maker, because new things will always come up. And everyone wants to have someone they can ask a question to. So for most of this process, that was me, and I'm not an accessibility expert. I learned a lot. But you know, it can be a little overwhelming feeling like you have to make decisions that you don't feel like you're educated or even empowered enough to make. But which is why you hopefully have, you know, other people on your side who can help you make those decisions. But people want someone that they can ask questions to. I was constantly, when we first started this process, getting, is this PDF accessible? Is this PDF accessible? You know, and I'm just like, look. But it did help me educate other people. I use this opportunity to say, doesn't even matter if this is, because this should just be a web page, or this should really just be 2 paragraphs on a web page. Like, you don't need to have this. Or just to ease people into it, yes, you can put this flyer up, but also that information needs to be on there. And it's not just because a screen reader can't read this, but a search engine, if someone comes to the website and tries to search for this event, they're not gonna find that PDF. So using different ways to explain that. But your champions are really, really important. If you get people who care about their jobs and are just not super apathetic, then they really will help spread that message around your organization. So for us, we were able to get a little bit of money to have a vendor come in and do trainings. So it was 2 or 3 days, and it was 2 4-hour sessions. And they were, like I said, slightly different. So the content creators had like document creation sessions about how to use, you are going to create a PDF, this is how you should use Word to create an accessible PDF. This is how you should use PowerPoint. And then we had remediation sessions that were more focused on Adobe Acrobat Pro, how you check documents, how you fix common issues. We also had that vendor create templates for us in Word and PowerPoint that kind of matched our most commonly used documents. So like memo documents, things like that. And if you were in the Pirate UX session, they talked about branding. I mean, that was another thing that I would always try to have like a 2-pronged approach. So I'm saying, you're using this document because it's accessible, but also it looks like, I mean, it's a county document and not like a 5th grader made it. And so people actually know they're looking at something official. So we're accomplishing, you know, 2 different things in one go with that. So all of our documents had the instructions for how to use them and keep them accessible, which most people delete immediately, especially if they are a department head, and then they just try to pretend that they're recreating it. But at least it's there, and you can use every mistake as an opportunity to educate someone on how they should be using those documents. We had one department that had they created an entire onboarding course that incorporated that because they create so many documents. So it was something I wanted to be able to do countywide, but we weren't able to. But if you can get some of your departments that create a lot to incorporate that, they know better than me up here what kind of documents they create and how they need to fix that. And really, once we had the templates created for us, I was able to make new ones on my own because I pretty much had learned enough that people could send me, okay, every month I'm creating this document, can you just create a template for me? I also had a microsite on our website, which I'm happy to share, where I put I created some quick how-to tips, and then I would add resources too. So our GIS people got really into this once I had presented to them a couple times. So they would always send me, like, if Esri had new accessibility resources, they would send them to me, and I had basically a running resource list that people could go and find their specific. So if it's social media related, if it's GIS related, they could find resources related to that. And then I also had a SharePoint site with all of our templates and some of the other very county specific materials. Probably one of the biggest challenges is the really pretty design materials. So we had we had what I called the kitchen sink template that had tables and everything in Word so you could create a document. But things like our annual report, the county leadership wants it to be really pretty. And so we finally got a graphic designer, and there's actually some really, really good videos on LinkedIn Learning. I'm sure other training sites have them too, about how to use InDesign and Illustrator in an accessible way. So it's a little extra time when you're learning it, because it's really just goes against how I think designers normally design. But then when you get the final product, you really don't have to do that much remediation. So that's something to consider if you have things like an annual report that you're going to have to put online every year. Acrobat Pro, we bought licenses for everyone who was the gatekeeper style type of person that was going to have to do remediation. But Site and Proof is another good, it's good for scraping your website, but they also, at least I don't know if they still do, but they had an add-on that looked at all your PDFs. And so we purchased that, and it's not perfect. I mean, it's really just looking at the most basic things, but at least it's helping you identify what you have on your website that is just super or non-compliant. And 90% of the time, you probably should just take it down all the way. You're like, I didn't even know this version of this old document was still on the website. And that's another thing I didn't mention, but we created like a retention policy too, that anything over 3 years should not still be on the website unless there was like a legal reason we needed to have that document up there. I know the budget book is probably the biggest nightmare, and they like to have 15 years worth up there, but it's not something we need to really have. So there are definitely things that come up that you don't know how you're going to handle them. So we had a few different ways that we handled that in terms of having a budget for remediation. We had one department, the building department, is flush with cash, so they actually had a vendor that they kept on retainer, and they would have all of their PDFs remediated through this vendor. Other departments I basically told, like, if you know that you're going to have some kind of big PDF document that needs to go on the website, you need to build in some kind of budget for getting that remediated. Another big thing that I didn't really include in here, but Site and Proof also has some training videos, and they have a series for procurement related, that I would highly recommend if you have it, having your procurement people go through, and hopefully they care enough to watch it. I know my people were not super excited about it, but if you, this should be built into your contracts, and not just your big digital things, but if you have a vendor who, so for example, our parks department does their parks master plan. A vendor puts that together, they gave them a PDF, this PDF is not compliant. They go back to the vendor says, well, for $5,000, we'll make it compliant for you. I was like, well, next time you do this, put in the contract that the final piece that they provide to you is compliant. So Public Works, they do work with a lot of vendors that do road projects, it's the same type of thing. And a lot of these companies are working with other governments, they're working with state and federal government, they should be giving you compliant documents. So a lot of people wanted to say, well, can we just have them hosted on their website and link to it? And I'm like, you can, but really that hurts my heart to tell you to do that. Like, that's not the best case scenario. So it's really a matter of, I think the more we twist people's arms to do that, the more you're helping everyone else in this room too, because we don't have to fight as hard. They're going to start doing it as a matter of practice. Still, there are times when we just could not make something compliant. GIS is a great example, or a screenshot of a map with a star on it that's showing you where the bathrooms are going to be at some event. Like, you can put an alt text on there, but it's not going to be that descriptive. So situations like that, I always required a disclaimer, or even if you have something that you're putting up that you know is probably like 75% there, but you just can't get it all the way, I would always put a disclaimer and require that you put a real person's phone or email address, so that if you do have trouble accessing information in this document, you can actually reach a real person who can help walk you through whatever pieces you're missing. It's probably not I'm sure maybe there's a better way. I'd love to hear if anyone has anything else that they do, but that was how I handled the situation where I'm like, I don't know what else to do. Technology continues to get better. We purchased an online form solution. I was able to get the funding for that and everything because of what happened with the lawsuit, but COVID made that. It went from nobody wanted to put forms with me, and then COVID happened, and everyone's calling me saying, oh, I do want a form for this, I do want a form for that. But that also helped us push through digital signatures, which stopped some of that printing, signing, scanning. and saves a lot of headaches. So this is just another, I guess, method that you can help push for those technology solutions is, okay, like we need to be compliant with these laws, and we, again, better experience for everyone, not just an accessibility issue, a user experience issue. And then the bottom two are my two favorite personal ones. I presented a little bit on this at NAGW in 2019, but I am a huge proponent for having the same information presented in multiple ways. So I'm not a very, I'm a visual person sometimes, but like you show me a map, I don't understand what I'm looking at. With our GIS, we were super into GIS, but like sometimes a map is just not the best way to show information. Or, you know, again, mobile phones, sometimes it's not very responsive either. So I would say, can we also show this in a table? And I'll show you some examples of that too. And then testing with the actual people that are affected by this issue is another huge thing. We have an organization called the Lighthouse for the Blind, and we had developed some in-house solutions, which I'll show you. And so I went out there and tested them with actual blind and low vision users, and we had people using all different types of technology. Some people are just looking at, you know, the text blown up to 300%, and some people are completely blind. And not only did it show me some of the things that weren't working in those tools, but it makes it a lot more understandable how they actually interact with your website. And they were so happy to be involved. Like they wanted to partner with us and do more. So those people, you know, just reaching out is a nice thing to do, but actually involving them, testing, and seeing beyond just guidelines that are words on a page, but actually seeing how people interact and where they're getting stuck is a huge piece of it. And if you can bring your CIO or your IT director or your county administrator with you, that'll be an eye-opener too, and they will definitely support your initiatives more. So this is an example of kind of showing information in alternative ways. So I'm not even going to show you what this used to look like, but when I first got to the county, our emergency information was in a map that you could not even read. It was like purple background with like green text. And so they made a pretty version, which is still nice, but it's probably, there are some accessibility issues even with that in terms of the color contrast and things. But I'm like, this is life and death information that people need, so I don't want people to only be able to access it on a map that might not load on their phone, when they don't have power, things like that. So every piece of information that's in this map is also on the website in a text format. So for example, our shelter listing on the right, when we update the shelters open on this map, on that table, it automatically updates to say it's open on that table. And we have the same thing for our sandbag locations, our evacuation zones, all of those things are also available in a text alternative on the website. And so this is another example. This is how you used to have to find your trash day. You used to have to go to this really ugly map and then figure out how to even get over to the map. And then it was that purple with text on it. And then if you typed your address in, it's almost impossible to find your trash day. I love your face. Yeah, so this is the only way you could find out what your trash day was when I got to the county. Yeah, and if you were on your phone, just forget it. I don't even know if you can find it. And then if you zoom in, the text on the map changes colors and everything. So yeah, you can kind of see Monday, Thursday. But then as soon as I moved over, I can't read that anymore. So we created the resident information tool, which was like one of my passion projects when I was there. And you basically just type in your address, and then everything, all that data that's tied to your address is appearing to you, not in some map that you have to find, but it's all right there in text. And you can print this out and put it on your fridge. But this was like a huge, like this helped save staff time because people aren't calling all the time just to ask, you know, when their trash day is. But also, this was one of the tools I went out and tested with the Lighthouse for the Blind. And the first time that I tested it, there were some things that didn't work. So we had to go and fix those issues, but that was learning for us. And then when we went back, they were able to access all that information that they couldn't even access before. This is my only little Granicus thing that I inserted, but they do have tools like this on their website, which I actually thought was cool because we spent so much time putting something like this together, and then here they have it like right built in. But nowadays, technology has all these things built in. So additional solutions. technology, like I said, is always getting better. There's always new things that you can find. I'm sure since I'm a little less into the accessibility field as I was when I first started this, there's probably been new things that have appeared that make things easier. We used a vendor and consultant, and they were helpful for just getting us started and off the ground. But my biggest thing is if you can get them, funded a position. I know I've had conversations with people here that it's still hard to find someone to fill that position, especially if you want them to be local. But that is truly, if you're dedicated to getting this done right, I think that's the best approach. But what actually we ended up doing is I got a temporary part-time employee. And honestly, the way it happened was I was doing open labs to help. If you have questions about accessibility, come see me, we'll talk through them. And an employee had a daughter who worked for one of those companies that basically universities send all their PDFs to, and they sit and they remediate all day. And she's like, my daughter knows all this stuff but doesn't want to work there anymore. Do you think you could use her? And so she came as a temporary part-time employee, and she helped create educational materials. She basically just took all those questions that I was getting, and I would say, go to Katie, and she would answer those questions. She would help remediate things, and then before she left, she basically called every vendor that existed on the planet and got their quotes for their rates. And now, well, not now because I'm not there anymore, but when people would say, hey, this PDF, is it accessible, blah, 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 I'm like, if you want this on the website, then you're going to have to use one of these vendors, and it's on you. And it's a little bit tough love, but it is getting people to rethink how they approach what they're doing, because now they have to budget for getting things fixed if they want them to be on the website. Another thing that I would have loved to have done would be, actually no, there are a lot of organizations that have web or digital related advisory boards, and having a chair or a person on there that is accessibility focused. I think the most untapped resource you'll find is those organizations like the Lighthouse for the Blind that really wouldn't mind partnering with you and helping educate people and helping just discover better ways to make content accessible. And so kind of like we've talked about in a lot of other sessions, accessibility, I think it's almost become like we just glaze over it because it's around us so much, but it's really about inclusive design. It's about being inclusive. And I think the design part of this is the other key. Starting earlier on in the process, like how are you designing the messaging and the way you're communicating, and how can we design it in a totally different way than what we're used to doing. So, PDFs, why are you even going that route at all? Like, as someone else said, what does it stand for? Printable document, whatever. You're probably not printing it. No, I don't have a printer. Who has a printer in their house? I mean, maybe you guys do, but people don't print stuff anymore. So we need to rethink how we're designing our digital communications and make it more inclusive for everyone. And then the last example or thing I'll say is, which I would guess some of you can identify with this, but closed captioning was created for deaf or hard of hearing people. I can't watch TV without closed captioning on because I'm reading what's happening. If Netflix is on and there's no closed captioning, I'll just totally tune out. I'm really paranoid about my phone having sound, so I don't watch any videos with sound on. If there's not a closed captioning on it, I'm not watching your video. But that's just one example of something that started out as an accessibility thing that we all benefit from. We all find ourselves in situations where that's helpful for us. And that's how, again, even going back to now that more people are using their phones, when you're making something that's more accessible on your website, easier to access, you're making it easier for everyone. So, rethinking how we're designing things and how we're communicating benefits the whole community. But, it's just another way you can position that message if you are getting some pushback. Because I know some people think you're making me put more effort in to get something to be accessible. But if you just gave me a Word document with your text and never gave it to me in a PDF, it would be less work for you. So that's just another example. And that's what I've got for you. I feel like I talked really fast, but any questions?
Okay, Word docs. Do you think Word docs, are they more natively accessible than PDFs? Because my experience is when you convert a Word doc to a PDF, all of your H1 tags become H4s, and it's a disaster.
Well, so, and when I, like, honestly, I would rather people give me a Word doc that I can copy and paste into the website and not
Right,
read a Word doc.
right.
But yeah, I don't know, so, I've never actually seen that particular issue where, like, I think if you're saving it the right way into a PDF, you're not gonna have, it should be in a pretty good space. And someone else might have a different experience than me, but I think there's a whole nother challenge with like just putting a Word doc up because not everyone can even open that. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think that's why people default to PDF because you can pretty much open that in anything nowadays, so.
And it's harder for people to change the end result.
Exactly.
See, my version says what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
you can
true.
change a website too. I just go on the developer and, you know, so. Yeah.
Like you, I'm a one-person shop for this. And so my question is around training. I've been trying to get the word out citywide, particularly for people that contribute the content to those gatekeepers. I know you mentioned an outside vendor. I'm just wondering, like, process for training and training a broader audience to just understand that documents need to be accessible.
Right. And like, I think you can find some pretty good training, especially if you're just looking for the understanding aspect. You can find stuff online. The vendor was helpful because they were in person, but I didn't mention this, but the one thing I do regret is that they wouldn't let us record, so I didn't have anything extra. And you have, you know, it doesn't take long before the employee turnover. So when I had the temporary employee, she kind of put together training materials and stuff that we could reuse. But like even if you do a training and you pull the things that you think are the most important and record yourself doing a training, that's better than nothing. But the open lab concept, I mean, COVID kind of flipped that, so I couldn't keep doing it. But having open labs and people come in and be trained, and all of my website trainings, so anyone who was editing the website, I would always do in-person trainings, and accessibility was woven into the entire training. So, but a vendor helps you get there to start with, to know what you need to, you know, communicate.
So what was your feedback like, both internally and externally? Because it sounds like you did exactly what I would do, a focus group of people who are the end users, who are giving you feedback, no, this sucks, change it this way, do that.
Mhm.
But like internally, what was the feedback like?
I think it was actually more positive. I think a lot of people actually felt, so I mean, Manatee County is an older population too. I think a lot of people felt that it was making it better for everyone. But there were definitely people that were frustrated with, and the thing is that what they're frustrated with is that they're used to doing something a certain way and now they have to do it differently. And it feels like it's a lot more work for them. And some people just completely just ignore everything and do whatever they want. But overall, I didn't get a lot of people who were really upset about it, and I think they all realized, like, I basically see people falling into two buckets every time I talk to someone, and I would just align my message to either you have to comply, some people just want to comply with the rules, or this is making a better, more inclusive experience for our community. And most people will fall in line with one of those things.
I guess the reason why I'm asking is because until you throw numbers at them and it's a lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, that helped.
You know, giving a reason.
It
to
helped
care
a lot
about
to
it.
get sued.
Right.
So
Like, because it's the law, we're
Yeah.
getting sued.
Right.
Oh.
So that,
Okay.
exactly, that's kind of thing. Do you think it takes a lawsuit?
Well, I mean, so I will say that the lawsuit against us was effective, not just for us, but for everyone around us. So even if you can find an example of someone in your state who's been sued, I think that could help you. And it's still happening. Like, I feel like it quieted down. We were in like a wave in Florida, but it's happening all over the place still. So that helps.
Well, and I've met a group who will remain nameless because, for many reasons, but their literal job is to go and look at, like, where's the next emergency happening? Okay, great, they're in the middle of emergency, let's make sure everything that they're sending out is accessible. And then in the middle of the emergency, at the most inopportune time, we're hitting you with a FOIA, now we're suing you, and you're like, but the world is burning, I don't know
Yeah.
how we're supposed to answer your call.
Well, so, and that's why I was kind of joking before, but before this even happened, right after I joined the county, we had Hurricane Irma. And our sign language interpreter didn't show up. And so they found this guy who was a lifeguard who had a deaf brother, and he did it, and we went viral. Like, we were in everything, everywhere, because he was saying Bear Pizza Monster is what the headlines were saying. But we had tons and tons of people. We didn't get sued for that or anything, but we had my Facebook, the county's Facebook, some group saw it and they all started spamming us with messages and telling us how terrible we were. But I'm like, I need to talk to the actual people who are in trouble right now because there's a hurricane here. So you don't want to put yourself in that position, so you want to be in a better position before you get to that situation. And so even giving that example of, okay, not only is this a priority because when we do get to an emergency situation, this is people's lives. It's not a, you know, you may think there's only 5 blind people in my county, let's say, but those 5 people still need to know what's going on in an emergency, or, I mean, every day. But examples like that help with those people who are, you know, don't take it seriously. But yeah, I mean, the lawsuit, it helped. I mean, it did.
Yeah, we've had to, so I fight this battle every day, great presentation. We've had to pull in county council and HR. So HR has the ADA accessibility lead, so I involve her and county council when we're getting a lot of pushback from different departments. And once you say county council, they go, oh, okay.
That's a good point.
Never mind.
Yeah, your legal team maybe can give you some more backing,
Because
some more
if
examples.
there's a document that we can't remediate, I pass it to county council to get approval, or they say, no, you're not gonna post that.
And that's why I think if you can get a policy, like, I guess every organization is different in terms of how much weight a policy carries, but at least you can point to that and say, like, look, this is how we operate, and you have to do it.
Did the agenda still cause a problem for you, or?
Yeah, that was one of those ones where I was like, look, I have given you all the tools and all of the education, but I can't be the big sister watching you, like, so I don't know what the situation is. I mean, the agenda coordinator, she just left after I left, but she was really, like, passionate about it, and so she did really check it. She would call me and be like, I don't think this is right, can you look at it? So I think they were in a decent space, but I know they weren't perfect. Let me say that.
Yeah, I'll say this much. When we went through our redesign, we did kind of do what it sounds like you did, and kind of reevaluated exactly what our retention policy was gonna be, because otherwise we would have had 10, 15 years plus of all of these PDFs that were never going to be gone back through. Because, I mean, the process of doing that would have been so creative that it just wouldn't have been possible. So during the redesign, we actually narrowed it down to probably, I think it was 4 years back is how far we decided our retention policy for the web was going to be. And that helped, but we still had 4 years worth of old documents out there that may not have been fully accessible. So we did what you did, and we started saying, okay, we're gonna put our best effort forward from this point on. So if we did get sued, and actually our legal team said that, you know what, that actually flies for us, you know, because otherwise it's a big league deal, you know, to go back and try to fix all of these old ones. So, you know, we were completely happy with that because there was no way we were gonna be able to do it besides the team.
Did you
that we
make like
had.
a formal document, a strategic plan, so you had something you did get sued for
So-
this was?
And that's what I was gonna say too, is like putting a statement on your website that's basically kind of that summary of what you decide when you're thinking of your policy, and saying this is what our plan is, and then if you can go back and update that every 6 months or something and just say this is where we are.
Right.
And cite and proof, you know, like that's an example of something you can measure and say, okay, we started out at 70%, whatever, and now we're at 90%. We're making improvements. They wanna see that you're making improvements, and that goes a long way.
So, to that, a ADA accessibility transition plan, we went through the transition plan process with our city, and a couple of other cities together. We bundled together, got the same company and the same vendor to come in and, one, educate, but two, and it wasn't just digital. I mean, digital was the, people did not understand, this is 2015, people did not understand that digital was a thing until all of a sudden the people from Accessology in Dallas came in and said, digital.
But that is so perfect because I bet every one of us, our organization has an ADA plan for the physical aspects. And who, isn't it the trendy thing to say now that this is our digital front door? You don't have to come in, you don't have to go use that inaccessible bathroom, but you do need to be able to use the website. So, like, it should be incorporated into that. And that was the challenge we had, is because we had one ADA guy, and that wasn't even his full job, but he had no clue about the digital side, you know? So, I mean, but I think that's a great argument that you can make as well, is like, well, we have an ADA coordinator. I don't expect that person to know this, but if they were paying $100,000 for a vendor to put together a plan, you can include some digital aspect to that, I think they should be able to.
Yeah, it does, what we were told by that was, even though we were 25 years overdue, and even though everybody is 25 years overdue, that it was 2015 or 16, it was the 25th anniversary of the ADA. And so that was the point, was having a plan. It's not the be all end all, but having a plan says, we have put a good faith effort, we have spent some money, we have a plan, so that the Justice Department doesn't come down and say, you're going to get everything done in the next 9 months, and you don't get to do anything else with any other
Right.
budget in your city. To that point, about your settlement, was your settlement with the Justice Department, or was it with an individual
No, it was
who
with
sued
an
you?
individual who sued us.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so,
And they never, I mean, they, to my knowledge, never checked back in. I mean, they were just going around and collecting
Right.
settlement offers. And that was, the timeline I felt like was a little crazy. But, you know, I think you have to have a plan, but you have to also be actually making, you know, moves on that plan. Because I think a lot of times it's easy to just make a plan, put it up on your website and say, see, we're doing it. But you have to actually be getting people to make a good faith effort to reach some level of compliance. But it's, you know, it's all about priorities at the end of the day, picking your battles. Like, I knew there were certain things that it just wasn't worth me harping on, because I wanted people to be bought in enough to do the big stuff. So, I don't know. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm curious about the online forms part that you just kind of mentioned,
Yeah.
but yeah, we definitely have a lot of applications that are PDFs, sometimes fillable, sometimes not fillable PDFs. Just curious, like, I guess what the tool was that you used and your process for.
Well, it was not the company I worked for. It's another big one. But I mean, I think that there's a lot of good solutions out there. I haven't evaluated them all lately to know what ones are better. Like, we do have one. There's another big one that's out there that I know of. And there's a few actually, honestly, really affordable ones. Like, I know in this group, when I was evaluating, I think FormStack. I think there's some people in here that use that. I forget what the other one was. And we looked at them all, and the one we picked, like, which we all do this, and like, here I am now work for a vendor, but I'm gonna be speaking very openly. Like, it's like, okay, well, I know if I go, at least my thinking sometimes was like, well, the government one should be more accessible, right? Because we're the ones they're designing for. I don't know if that's always the case, but we kind of ended up going with a government type focus one, because we felt that they would be held more accountable for keeping it accessible. Some of the other ones, it was like right when you got to like the signature aspect, then that was where it got a little blurry, and that part wasn't accessible. And as they said in one of the presentations, you can be 80% or 90% accessible, but if the submit button isn't accessible, then what does it matter? But there's a lot of solutions out there. I think there's probably a lot more than when we went through it. But that one was easy for me because I was managing the whole solution by myself. The only thing I will say is if you can get more buy-in and collaborate with your departments, having something with a back-end workflow would be nicer. We didn't have that. It was like, it literally was like it's submitted to an email, and then you handle it how you handle it in your systems. But if I could go back, I would have done a bigger process and involved more people to do something that was more. But still, at least for the front-end user, they weren't doing a fillable PDF or printing something out. That was a big step. Did you still have?
Yeah, back to the agendas. So we get a lot of information from third parties that become part of that agenda packet. Did you require those third parties to present accessible
This was one where in our so like I had to always think about it in two ways. So we have the settlement, which we kind of we were able to put some terms on, but then there's the law, right? So per our settlement, we put in some exceptions, which included things like GIS and third-party documents on agendas. So per the settlement, we were in compliance if those things weren't accessible, but I really wanted them to be, so I would try to push for them to be, but if they weren't, they would still go on the agenda, to be honest. But I think, that's why I always try to encourage people, like, that you need to make that a requirement. If it's a proposal that someone's submitting that's gonna have to go on agenda, tell them that it needs to be compliant. How often that happens, I don't know, I'll be honest, but I'm gonna keep pushing that message to try to get more people to do it.
And one thing that we ran into is there's a ton of vendors right now, that will scan your website, and for them, it's a check mark in a box. But like, when I actually went back to our website to see like, what did we do for alt text, and it was like, graphic. So if they're looking for the check marks, but like, we as content
Yes.
creators, we really have to own that content. You have to do your due diligence, and we're having a hard time right now because leadership is always like, get it on the website, get it on the social, get it on this. You're like, whoa, 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 this is not a create it, send it, and it's done. There's like a process here. So having those like conversations with leadership for these third-party tools, yeah, it's great that they, you know, essentially put a check mark in the box, but like, we're really meant to serve our citizens. We really gotta be telling our leadership, like, it's gonna take me 3 or 4 sentences to define what this image is, or I really need to break down, you know, the outline for this or whatever. So that's something that we noticed right away.
Not to mention that there are a lot of products out there right now that, oh, it's one click, you install this thing, whatever.
Exactly.
It actually makes your site less accessible.
Right, yeah.
You know, that's been a thing. The term, you know, third parties came up. Accessibility doesn't just apply to your website. It applies to the third party vendor who you've contracted with to do, you know, whatever product you're doing. Whether that's, you know, Laserfish for Laserfish forms, or, you know, anything like that. We've run into some things where we've, certain products by certain third-party vendors, you know, they said they were compliant. I go and scan them and they are not. I call them on said non-compliance. We actually had that written into a contract just a few months ago that the said product will be compliant within 18 months. That was good enough for me, you know, covering our bases.
And that's a really great point. I remember you saying that. And
Yeah.
I had the same conversation with a vendor that we were looking at for our meetings and agendas software way back. And I was like, you're not compliant. You can't even give me anything that shows you're compliant. And you're a huge company. But it takes even the little people to push back that if they're going to do it for you, then they're doing it for everyone, right? So, like, this is that little small uphill battle, but every person that questions it and pushes for it will help get one more thing more compliant. Which again, still, you can go and mess that up very quickly. You know, and that's what we were talking about. Education, tools are great, but education is important because I can sell you a great website that's accessible, and then you can go mess it up in 2 seconds by posting something that's not accessible anymore. So, yeah.
I think you also have to be careful because accessibility is such a big requirement and hot topic. And we had a vendor come out and do a demo, and I was so shocked because he was saying, oh, you know, no one, it was all about remediation. It was some big vendor, they only work with the state, but now they're coming out and working with little cities. And he said, no one can, oh, it's too hard to do it yourself. It'll take 10 hours every document. No one could do that. You have to send all your documents out and have them remediated, and that's the only way you can do it. And your site has got all these problems. You know, so, and we've gotten things unsolicited who've kind of done the same kind of thing. So you really have to be aware.
And that's why, like, you know, for me, it's great to look at requirements, but actually going and sitting with someone and seeing them use the website. I'd rather them to be able to use it and see a person can use it than just be checking off boxes. So yeah, they can always find something wrong, but like, is it the important stuff or is it the little things? And is it something that is really an internal issue you need to address, like you just don't need to have that many PDFs, and maybe there are things you can do instead of just sending them off to a vendor and not changing your own processes.
And when you send them off, just like she was saying, there's a judgment call. If you haven't originated that document, you don't really know what that's supposed to be saying. You have to, you know.
Plus, I don't know if any of you have sat and remediated a document, but I can't tell you how many times I've actually ended up deleting something or totally messing the document up and just like giving up, or you're you know, taking something that was correct and you're making it wrong. So like, let's find a different format if we can.
So,
Yeah.
quick question for me. So, PDFs are my life.
Oh, boy.
I would say about 15 to 20% of my job is putting up PDF documents. What alternatives do you suggest to PDF? Now, mind you, my stuff, I'm federal government. so
Okay,
My
yeah.
stuff is like 30 pages, 1,000 pages, policies that have been around since George Washington was president. Right.
I mean, and that's the thing, like, and I don't even know that I have the answer for you. I do, you know, what is the ultimate purpose? You know, it's a policy, right? Who's looking at the policy? Is it for the public? Like, there are times when I think a PDF makes sense. There are times where you can go find, actually, if you look at the UK, you know, they've done a really great job of moving away from that. And they have, I mean, basically that PDF might be an entire microsite, or it might be 5 pages on a website that they might be long, but at least it's accessible, and you can search through that probably better than you can search through a PDF, unless you've done a good job with the PDF, in which case, you know, it's fine. But like, do you have the bookmarks in the PDF where you're jumping through?
Yeah, so
those are anchor links on a website.
Yeah,
Right?
so
Yeah.
the federal government is pretty good on, here's what you have to do to make your PDF compliant. There's, you know, even before I got there, they had rules, policies, and procedures. So yeah, I go through the whole making sure there are bookmarks and the tag thing going through. But it is easier if you give me a Word document and create, and I can set up the Word document and then create the PDF from there. Right, and so now though, I will admit our focus has been external documents, making sure those are accessible.
Yeah.
Now we've got, and I'm probably not saying this the right way, but now we've got kind of an influx of employees and staff who have disabilities as well, that we have not been sensitive to.
Yeah.
And so now, everything that we create, regardless of whether it's going out to the public or if we're just emailing a document from one staff to another, everything has to be accessible.
Yeah.
And so now it's about educating the originator of the document, you know, and it's really this huge mindset change, because before, I go in, I open up Word, and I just do my thing.
But yeah, and so I don't know if you guys, do you have an intranet?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so everything that was a document before, why isn't that a page on the intranet? I want to search through my employee policy. Well, okay, employee policy is a perfect example. When I joined Manatee County, I was like, I don't even know if there's a dress code, and I couldn't even find this policy. I searched the intranet, I couldn't find it. It probably wasn't a document somewhere, but what if that was an actual pages on the intranet with that information? It is, it's like a totally hard thing to rethink, but if you think about it, and those are more living than PDFs. When you have a version, you can't even find the most recent version. At least you have a living document on a website or an intranet site that is being updated, and you know whatever you're looking at is the most up-to-date, or should be the most up-to-date version. So, but no, I mean, that's a really good point where we were the same. We were like, we're going to focus on external. But like, if we had hired, I mean, that you shouldn't be, right? The law is all of it. And if you do hire someone with a disability, like, what, you're gonna tell them they can't, sorry. And there's a lot of software that is like that too, where, yeah, the front end is accessible, but is the back end? Yeah.
Just to follow up on what you were saying, there's this perception in the federal government that the PDF is the most secure way of doing anything, and if we don't have a PDF, then our information is not secure. And we can't convince them that a web form is just as viable a way of collecting information as a PDF. It's a mentality.
Well, and yeah, especially if you're collecting information.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say a web form is there's way more built into that or can be way more built into that process to make it secure.
I'm just curious, has anybody looked at some of the policy softwares where you put it and it looks like a Word, but then puts it into HTML? And it does versioning? I've kind of started looking into that because much like you, we've got all these manuals, policies, SOPs. So I was just curious if anybody was aware of any that
I know one challenge we would have though was ordinances or things where they're updating it and then they're marking in the changes they're making, and it's just like red text or it's a strike through, and I'm like, I don't even know where to begin with you. But like, there's great solutions out there now to put your codes and your ordinances online instead of in a PDF. And you know what? Then I can link to that part of the ordinance from the website. Like, it makes everything better.
That's something
Yeah.
like that for a policy manual, or the SFEs would be
Yeah.
a nice one